growing up with a parent who doesn't let you be yourself, who doesn't prioritize you or your needs or even validate your needs or your wants or your boundaries or your thoughts. When you have a narcissistic parent or narcissistic mother, they are the center of attention. They have to be admired, they have to be appreciated, they have to be prioritized at all times. And that means that all of your stuff, all of you, gets deprioritized at all times.
We are going to be talking to Dr. Suzanne Manser today about a really important topic, and I think it applies to many of our listeners. And it's about how growing up with a narcissistic mother impacts your love life. Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you, I have written 2 books, soon to be 3 books, which will be published shortly. The first book is Becoming a Woman of Value, How to Thrive in Life and Love. And this book is for anyone who has ever played small, whoever has just survived in life, but wants to really get to that next level of thriving, of really living your purpose and your passion. And the second book is Choice Points in Dating. And this book is a guidebook for people to let you know all the choices that you have in the dating world, which means how to think about dating, how to choose your right partner, how to know when to stay, when to go, your must-have, your deal breaker lists, how to go on your last first date. And both of these books are available for Kindle or paperback on Amazon, and Choice Points is also available as an audiobook. This week's tip on becoming a woman of value is to be playful. We often undervalue play. We are so serious at work and we don't have enough fun and play in our lives. So my challenge to you is to find a way to be more playful, find a way to just bring less seriousness, less heaviness in your life, and find some people that you can laugh your head off with, because that's super important. Before I bring on my guest, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. If you're not yet a member, this is for women over 40 who are looking for a positive place for support. Most of the dating groups out there, the support groups out there, are not monitored carefully. My group is. I carefully chose 7 group monitors to make sure that comments and posts are in alignment with my core values, with my boundaries. And this is really a unique group. I post in there all the time, so you'll be the first to know what programs I'm offering. You'll see my podcast posts in there, my articles, and whenever I appear on other people's shows. So join us at Your Last First Date. And now for my guest. Her name is Suzanne Manser. She is a Harvard-trained psychologist and author who writes about her own experience growing up with a narcissistic mother and how it impacted her life. In addition to her book, I Hate You, A Love Letter to My Mother, Healing Paper Cuts, Mother Wounds, and Intergenerational Pain, and guided journal, I Hate You, A Love Letter to My Mother, a journal for healing your mother wound and transforming your life. Dr. Manser also writes articles about how to live with self-acceptance and meaning, and has given many talks and interviews. Though her primary role is therapist, she has worn many different hats, including clinic director, professor, supervisor, board member, and consultant. Whether through therapy, writing, or speaking, Suzanne is dedicated to helping people heal the pain from their childhood, improve their mental health, and create rich, juicy lives. Welcome to the podcast, Suzanne.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited about this topic. It's relevant to so many of us who have had difficult mothers, narcissistic mothers, self-centered mothers, mothers who didn't parent very well. So let's talk about why our mothers, well, let's first talk about your story. before we get into, the nitty gritty of impacting our sense of self and our love life. Tell us, like, briefly why you wrote this book.
So I grew up with a very well-intended mother who was narcissistic and alcoholic and just got caught up in her own inherited trauma. She really meant well. She really wanted to be a good parent. And I think she did try. But she had been parented by two really stellar narcissists. And she grew up with a really low sense of self-esteem, low sense of self-worth. Tried not to pass that on, but was one of the most critical, controlling people you could imagine. I had to stand up straight all of the time. I had to sort of look perfect, do everything perfectly, seem perfect. And if I wasn't, not mean criticism necessarily, but constant criticism, I wasn't allowed to be myself. I wasn't allowed to even get to know who I was because I had to do everything her way so that she was comfortable. And that led to my own low self-esteem, not knowing myself well, not accepting myself. And eventually I became a therapist, worked my way out of it after decades and decades of work. She died about 4 years ago. And all of these feelings came pouring out that I thought I had processed and handled and turned into a book.
Well, it's good that you channeled it, number one, because it could have ended up in other places. But yeah, it's not easy to just be over it, to have healed it, because this is your whole upbringing until 4 years ago. You had this person in your life who was supposed to be your guide, who was supposed to honor and love you for you, and wasn't able to, which is what so many of us experience. And I think whether, parents are brought up by people who are similar or they've had neglect. I know my mom was brought up by two parents who were very loving, and she always talked about them in the most loving terms. And so I kept asking questions like, why did her self-esteem suffer? And it turned out that her parents were just super busy. They ran a hotel and like a bed and breakfast kind of hotel, and were constantly cooking and cleaning and, slaughtering the animals, doing everything. And she was made to work at a very young age. And so her interpretation of that was, I felt put upon and I felt neglected, and without articulating any of it, because her memory was, I had amazing parents. And so a lot of times it's not as obvious as being brought up by narcissistic parents or alcoholic parents. We do get affected by our mothers and our fathers, and they grow up in all kinds of ways. And even in the same family, I have 3 children who are completely different, who all have different experiences of how we brought them up. And so I think it's just fascinating how, we're the product of our parents, but also of the timing that we were born and all kinds of things. Are you the only child?
No, I have a sister who's 10 years older than I am. So she has a very different relationship with my mom and experience of my mom. She was the product of my mom's first marriage, which ended when my sister was about 1 or 2, so really early on. But she grew up kind of real close with my mom. It was just the two of them for a while, them against the world. Much, I was going to say much better relationship than my relationship with my mom, but actually I think just different. It seemed closer, but I think it was equally complicated.
Yeah, it sounds codependent and really unhealthy. But yeah, it can look different and better in some ways, but yeah, dysfunctional, bottom line.
Yep.
So, for
Yep.
anyone who's listening who can relate to anything that we just shared about mothers and complications and narcissism, and I love how compassionately you speak about her too. It's just she
Mm.
did her best, and she was a wounded person who was brought up by wounded people. But there's still so much power that they hold over our self-esteem. So why is it that our mothers hold this power?
Well, specifically with mothers, going back to the beginning of people, when when we were fully dependent on our mothers for survival, both, while we were in her womb, but then, when we were first born and babies and infants and needed to be protected and fed and taken care of. This was the one person who was designated to be that person for us. This was our protector, our carer, our nurturer, the person who feeds us. All of these things wrapped into one from the moment we were conceived. So our moms have this really unique, special role in our lives that nobody else has. And we have a lot of expectations that are, thousands and thousands of years old. But I say built into ourselves at this point, that our mothers are going to be that person for us. And not all mothers can be, as you just talked about, because of their own history, because of their own experiences. So when our mothers fail us in this way, it feels incredibly wounding. It feels like the floor is pulled out from underneath us, because of these expectations.
Yeah, so it's interesting, even though fathers have more of a role now in child rearing, mothers are carrying us. That mothers are, I mean, mothers who give birth are carrying us. Some people adopt or have surrogacy, but all of those choices, what we eat, the environment we have. I mean, I grew up in a time when mothers were smoking and
Yeah.
taking diet pills and taking pills to prevent miscarriages and all kinds of things that they didn't realize were harmful to us. Um, but it feels incredibly painful when we don't have the guidance that we want to have. And I can say that I've known men who feel the same about their fathers, that there should be some guidance. There should be, like, how do I manage sex? How do I groom myself? All the things that we should be taught, hopefully should, by the people who raise us. We're not always taught those things, and we don't always have the guides that we would like to have as parents.
And that can be so, as you said, so painful because we have this expectation that that's who we should have in our lives. That's who our parents should be. And when they don't turn out to be that person, we tend to think it's our fault. We tend to think that we've done something wrong, or we are something wrong, or we're just not deserving.
And the expectations never go away. I think even intellectually, if we know that they are not capable of being a certain way, we still get disappointed every single time that they are the way that they always are.
Oh my gosh, story of my life with my mother until she died 4 years ago, until I was 48. I continue to have that expectation, even though I knew better. But it's, as you said, super hard to put down.
Yeah, very hard. Very few people are able to just say, "I accept this is the way they are."
Hmm.
It's very zen. So let's talk about the impact it has to be brought up with someone like that. Like, so we have this pain. What else happens to us, especially in our love life?
Growing up with a parent who doesn't let you be yourself, who doesn't prioritize you or your needs, or even validate your needs or your wants or your boundaries or your thoughts. When you have a narcissistic parent or a narcissistic mother, they are the center of attention. They have to be admired. They have to be appreciated. They have to be prioritized at all times. And that means that all of your stuff, all of you, gets deprioritized at all times. Um, Growing up like that, man, that impacts everything about how you see yourself and feel about yourself, which typically is then going to impact how you relate to other people and the kind of partners that you choose. Um, super quickly. When you grow up with that kind of low self-esteem, low self-worth, maybe not believing that you deserve to be treated well, that you deserve unconditional love, you might seek out partners who continue with that worldview, who continue to treat you critically with conditional love, if love at all, who are potentially abusive, who are narcissistic themselves. It just feels familiar. It's what you know. And so oftentimes that's the kind of partner you seek out.
Yeah, we definitely seek out familiarity. I'll often ask a new client, who does this person remind you of? And it's like right back, oh, my father, oh, my mother. But we still do it, right? Because there's this unconscious pull until you really do some of the healing. So what does the healing look like?
A lot of the healing, in my opinion, should start, or often does start, with just understanding narcissism, understanding that it has nothing to do with you, that the way your mom or your parent treated you is entirely about them, not about you and what you deserved. And that helps to take it less personally and start to unhook from all of the pain that has been given to you. Once you can start doing that, then it's about starting to connect more with yourself than with your narcissistic parents. So figuring out what you need, what you want, how you feel, what you think, what your opinions are, what your boundaries are, figuring all of those things out, because when you grow up with a narcissistic parent, again, they don't allow you to have your own stuff. They don't allow you to be you. You have to always be in service of them. When you can really validate and connect with yourself, then you can start to prioritize yourself. You can start to look for people and be in relationships with people who support this maybe new view of yourself, who can support the self-worth and the self-esteem and the boundaries and the different opinions. One really common thing with narcissistic parents and narcissistic mothers is that they don't tend to empathize with their kids. They really just don't see outside of themselves. They don't really validate any worldviews or perspectives or experiences that are different from their own. And growing up with a parent who doesn't empathize with you can lead you to feel like, again, you don't deserve to be empathized with, or it can be weird when somebody does empathize with you. It can feel really foreign. And so that's another way that healing is important, is to know that you deserve empathy and to start empathizing with yourself, even having compassion for yourself, which is so hard for the best of us. But when you are able to start bringing those pieces in, you will naturally start gravitating towards partners and people in your life who also empathize, support, and have compassion for you.
You no longer tolerate the people who have no empathy or prioritize themselves. So all your relationships start to become healthier. I mean,
yeah.
I remember my own journey towards healthier relationships, and I didn't know what boundaries were. I didn't know how to name a feeling or a need until I started doing the deeper work. And I knew, like, gut feelings of things that felt off and wrong and bad to me. And I gravitated towards healthier people from a very young age. Like, I recognized the dysfunction in my family, but I didn't have a name for it, and I didn't know what it was really until I was much older. And probably when I started doing the life coaching certification and started to really do deeper work with communication and boundary skills, which is why I focus on that primarily in my work today, because so many of us are lacking these skills and don't feel the right to express ourselves, to feel seen and heard, that we don't even know that it's a human right.
And without knowing that you have the right to be seen and heard, without the experience of being seen, intimacy is impossible. Intimacy is about sharing your authentic self with somebody else. And if you've not been supported in being your authentic self, then you might not even know who you are deep down. But you certainly aren't going to trust that you can openly share it with somebody and receive empathy or unconditional love or any kind of support, because that's just not been your experience.
Asking for support is taught, because if you grow up in a dysfunctional family, those people usually don't ask directly for support. They're martyrs, they're victims, everything bad happens to them, and nobody ever supports me. But did you ever ask anybody? It's like, oh, no, they should know. They should just know. Like, if they cared about me, they would know. And so we're taught all these false myths about relationships and people and how to communicate with them. And so, yeah, it's so important to do that inner work, but just understanding that it has nothing to do with you, and that you don't deserve to be treated this way. Nobody deserves to be ignored, deprioritized, disrespected, being brought up in a home where everybody else's needs were more important. And they're unhappy. That's the thing, is like they look often from the outside as really confident and secure, and they're really not.
When I think about my own mom, she again grew up with these narcissistic parents who treated her well if she performed well and treated her poorly if she didn't perform well. And so she grew up with this sort of shell of an understanding of herself and very little self-esteem. And even as a little kid, I could feel it. I could feel that if I was mean to her, or if I did anything that she could perceive as rejection, she would have a huge reaction. She would get so rejected. I mean, even when I was 5 or 6, I had such a big impact on her. If I just had my natural feelings, if they weren't kind towards her, if they were a reaction to whatever she was doing to me, it had such a big impact on her that not only could she barely tolerate it, I couldn't tolerate her impact, or I couldn't tolerate her reaction to my feelings or my response. And so I learned really quickly that I didn't get to have reactions. I didn't get to have anything, again, authentic or real, if I was around her.
And were you able to be real with other people?
Not for a very, very long time. I think it was in my 20s, early 30s. I was looking around at the people around me and really admiring how authentic they were and the depth of connection that they had with other people. And it took me years of trying to really get to a place where I felt that I could trust myself and others enough to be open in that kind of a way and have those kind of deep relationships. So it really did take me longer than I wish it had.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts, like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/lastfirstdate to learn more and claim this offer. Even if you don't grow up with severe dysfunction and trauma, it's hard to be completely vulnerable and real. Most people hold back parts of themselves. They are people pleasers. I totally remember, the people in my life who I respected and admired who could do this well. And one of them was a play therapist that I had hired for my son. And I loved her so much because she was so boundaried, but also really loving and just completely honest. And so you knew when you came into her office, you had to take your shoes off. And you knew that you couldn't go into the room with your kid, that was his time, and she was very clear in a loving, kind way. And I remember that imprinted on me, like, oh, you can be kind and have boundaries. You can do both. And it's hard for a lot of people to do that. But to me, that's the ideal way to parent, to have limits. And it's also the ideal way to be in romantic relationships, because love has limits. Love is not, oh, you can do anything you want and I will love you unconditionally. There are conditions for the way we're treated, but the love that we have should be open and given from the heart. Like, how would you explain that kind of love limits kind of dynamic?
Well, you're talking about boundaries. And when I talk about boundaries with people, narcissists tend to be offended. Lots of people tend to be offended by boundaries, but narcissists tend to be offended by boundaries because they're not allowed in. And, they, up until that moment, didn't know that there was somewhere that they weren't allowed because they are so special and so superior and so unique, so entitled. But when you think of a boundary as, this is how I'm going to show you how to love me. This is how I'm going to show you how to respect me, by telling you what my boundaries are. All the space between me and my boundary, that's mine. I own that. And I'm going to teach you where that boundary is so that you can respect me and respect what's mine. Again, a narcissistic parent especially does not let their child have their own sovereign self. And so they're always going to ignore, invalidate, or steamroll over that boundary. I don't know that you can necessarily teach this easily to a narcissist, but in terms of teaching sort of love, I think the idea of boundaries as an act of love is really important. I'm going to love and respect you by seeing and respecting your boundaries. I'm going to ask you to love and respect me by seeing and respecting my boundaries. I think that concept is really important.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. I started practicing boundaries on both my parents. That was the first place that I really practiced, because they both violated boundaries all the time. And I remember one of the ways I practiced boundaries was my mom would always take other people's calls while she was on the phone with me and just completely forget that I was on the other line. And I set it up. I said, if we're on a call together, that's our special time together. And it means a lot to me that you stay on the call and not take other calls. If you take another call, I will hang up. And I did. And she got mad the first few times I did it. And then she started saying, I'll let it go to voicemail. And it was like shocking.
Wow.
But I knew whether she did that or not, I was going to assert my boundary. And I think that's an important distinction for a lot of people. They think, oh, it's to change the other person. I never intended to change anybody. I just intended to be respected and to feel respect. And if I wasn't going to get the respect I wanted and deserved, I was going to do something different. And same thing with my dad. And just, putting those boundaries in place, it doesn't mean that person is going to be completely different. I was lucky that I got some good responses. I also spoke up when my feelings were invalidated. I started saying, I know you're trying to help, but can I tell you what would help more? And a lot of it was my mother's discomfort with me having any emotion other than everything's great. So I was really worried about something. And she said, don't worry. And I said, telling me don't worry is not helpful. And I said, what would help me is to say, I believe in you. I know you got this. And I gave her language. I mean, I know she's not going to ever really be using that language, but that's what I needed to hear. That's what the inner child needed to hear. And, I think that if we even know, like, oh, this doesn't feel good, I'm going to speak it out loud. She may not like it, but I'm still going to do it. I'm curious if you were able to do any of that with your mom.
As you're giving your examples, I was trying to think, what are mine? And the only one that's coming to mind at the moment is that I did put a boundary. Well, many times I put a boundary up around her drinking around me when I was an adult. And she couldn't tolerate a conversation about it. And so I wrote her a letter. And if I had any conversations where I put up any boundaries or expressed anything other than everything's fine, she just shut down immediately, gave me one word answers, and there was nothing was going to come of that in the future. So wrote her a letter, again, wrote her many letters, but wrote her a final letter about her drinking. And, if you are drinking around me, here's what I'm going to do, because it reminds me so much of my childhood and it brings up so much trauma. But if you're drinking around me, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave, or I'm going to ask you to leave, wherever we are. So what she did in response to that was she just started to hide her drinking.
Oh.
So she would pretend she wasn't drinking, or pretend what she was drinking was water, if it was a vodka tonic or something. So I didn't have any real good experiences with boundaries. I'll have to say, other boundaries that I tried to put up, probably didn't do super gracefully in the way that you described yours, and the one that you described. And she tended to react to any assertion of boundaries on my end as if I had said something mean, I guess. Just treated me like I was being very mean, and there wasn't any willingness to have conversation around it.
Yeah, that's too bad. I mean, my mom would get defensive all the time, and just make excuses. Well, I was tired. I didn't sleep well last night, so that's why I said what I said. And I would ignore those things, but when you're not getting any honest response and no willingness to have a conversation, it's really frustrating. So let's talk about the extreme examples where it's so bad that people don't want to be around their mother. People have gone no contact. They have, what's it called when you divorce your parent? There's a word for it.
Emancipation.
Emancipation, yeah. So what would it take for somebody to go to that extreme?
I think it's different for every person, of course, but it's typically repeated examples or repeated instances of being disrespected or harmed in whatever way. So a lot of the people that I've talked to are adults who have tried over and over and over to either just tolerate whatever behavior their parent or their mother does to them, or have conversations like you did. And when the immediate or eventual response from the parent is essentially, whatever you just told me is invalid and I'm not going to listen to it, at some point, people get to a place where the only way that they can protect themselves is to go no contact or emancipate themselves, where they just have to put up either an indefinite level of no contact or some period of time. But there are no other options sometimes in keeping yourself safe. And absolutely, we all have the right to keep ourselves safe, no matter who the other person is.
Yeah, that's very true. I had a client who had such a horrible relationship with her mother, who was so narcissistic, and she moved back home with her mother for a while after one of her divorces. And it was like constant igniting the wound, constant, feeling criticized, feeling nothing I do is enough. You don't see me, you don't see me. And I just, we talked so much about her just getting out of town, like just get away from your mother. She is gonna torture you. I mean, I gave her language to be able to talk to her mother differently and be less reactive, but this stuff stays with you. It's in your bones, man. And it can be so harmful. And the choices she had made romantically were definitely impacted by her mom and the way she was treated, but by both parents, but mostly her mom. So let's talk a little bit about intergenerational trauma and how does it continue to get passed down generation after generation?
Usually subconsciously. My maternal grandparents were children during the Great Depression, and they lived in families where scarcity was the most plentiful thing. Their parents did not have the internal or external resources to offer their children almost anything. If they got, if they got food and shelter and clothes, they got a lot. So these kids grew up largely ignored by their parents, not out of malice or anything, just the parents had, nothing left to give at the end of the day. And so they grew up feeling unimportant. And when you look at how both of my mom's parents treated her, you can see that. You can see that they became the arbiters of acceptability. That's how they made themselves important. They decided what was right and what was wrong. And they made sure that their kids hopped to. And when their kids didn't, they heard about it and they learned that they weren't acceptable as people and they weren't lovable as people. So my grandparents, who had been made to feel unimportant, now found a way to feel important by making their own kids feel unimportant. My mom did the same thing with me. She really tried not to. She saw it to some extent, but she just couldn't tolerate in me what was not tolerated in her. And again, praise me for some things, but the deep things, the important things, the things that I needed to be seen for, she couldn't tolerate those. And so the trauma got passed down. Maybe because I'm a therapist, maybe because it's the time it is, because I was around people who are really authentic and connected with themselves, I was able to do the work. And by the time I had kids, although for sure I will do something that will mess them up in some way, this particular hot potato I see, and I'm trying really hard not to pass it down, trying really hard to let them be who they are and let them know that love is unconditional and their acceptability is unconditional and they are, amazing, wonderful people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing when you can break the legacy of that trauma being passed down generation after generation. And so many people believe that's their lot in life. It's the way I am, it's the way I was raised. I have no choice. And one of the reasons I wrote my book, Choice Points in Dating, is because I kept hearing I have no choice about so many things. And we have a choice. We have a choice as to how we educate ourselves. But parenting brings up a lot of stuff, just like dating does. It's like, oh my God, I thought I was over this and I was nothing like my mother. And now I turned into my mother. And oh my God, I have to not do that. And it's having that awareness, I think, catching yourself. If you go into that, like talking to your kids about making everything about you, for example, and then, or telling them they should do something. So many parents live out their dreams through their children and don't allow their kids freedom to make choices. And I have one kid who graduated college out of three, and I don't care. I love my children, and their path did not include graduating college. And if they sat around doing nothing but watch video games all day, I would have a problem with that, but that's not who they are. And I think that a lot of people who I knew struggled with my choice to support my children, because they were uncomfortable. And it's so, just tuning into who is this person, not who am I and how am I reflected and what's everybody going to think of me? So I have to force my kid to become a doctor because that's the right thing to do. It's just terrible. So many people graduate medical school, law school, and then 10 years later, they say, this was never my path. I was making my parents happy, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My kids are only 8 and 10,
Okay.
so not quite at that place yet. But, all the things that they're doing that I wasn't allowed to do. I mean, even just showing off, just feeling real good about yourself and showing off that you can do a new taekwondo move or whatever. My mom would have shut that down immediately if I had gotten into that mode because she was so embarrassed by it and it was so not allowed. But I love it when my kids show off. I love it when they're feeling themselves. And I can see, they want us to feel the same delight that they're feeling. That's all that they want, is to share, like, oh my gosh, look at this really cool thing. And if you can attune to them in that way, if you can just share that excitement for a moment, that's all that they need. And to give that kind of attunement and validation to a kid, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to feel seen
Mm-hmm.
and validated for who you are, not that you're a reflection of your parent, but that you came out all complete by your, you're
Yeah.
this amazing person. And it's my kids see it in other families, and they feel bad for the kids who are being brought up by parents who were really dysfunctional. My son has a friend whose mother fell apart after her husband died, and she has attracted the worst partners and is just very dependent on her kids for things she should not be. And you can see the impact it has on these adult children and how they turned out. It's really important to do this work. Yeah. So you say something really interesting, that it's better to teach people how to hate than not to hate. So tell us what that means.
Well, so the title of my book, or the beginning title of it, is I Hate You, a love letter to my mother. And it's titled that because I hated her from, probably age like 7 or 8 until she died when I was 48. I hated her. I tried to love her, but hate was kind of the predominant emotion. And I would say for the last 20, 25 years of her life, I tried actively not to hate her. I'm a psychologist, I'm a therapist, this is what I do, I'm good at it. I could not figure out how to stop hating my mom. I knew that she wasn't intending malice. I knew that she wasn't trying to hurt me. I could see most of it, not all of it. And I still couldn't get out of it. So I'm passionate about helping people see that hate is just another emotion, like anger, like sadness. It's an uncomfortable emotion. It can be a big, scary emotion, but the emotion itself is not the problem. The problem is that we don't teach people what to do with hate. So when they feel it, they act out. They try to get rid of it. That's what we do with hard emotions. We try to get rid of them. If we teach people how to manage their hate, what to do with their hate, it will just wash through them the same way that anger can wash through somebody or sadness can wash through somebody. It's a way of validating themselves and not invalidating a part of themselves as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think all emotions are valid, and we tend to categorize good emotions, bad emotions, things that we don't want to feel, like anger, hatred. So I'm going to ask you the final question, which is, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date, especially if they were raised by a narcissistic mother?
So many words. But my favorite thing to say for somebody going on their hopefully last first date is that when you're on the date, instead of focusing on what that person might be thinking of you, please focus on what you think of the person that you're on a date with. So instead of looking at yourself through their eyes, stay in your body, look through your eyes at them, and kind of get a sense of whether this is a good fit for you.
I think so many of us have been programmed and trained to just want to be chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel so flattered if somebody thinks we're attractive and thinks that we are worthy because we were brought up with such little self-worth. And to switch the focus back on ourselves is so foreign in the beginning.
Absolutely. And I think the more you practice it, the less foreign it feels. And then it starts to feel really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering, when you chose your husband, after being brought up this way, was that after doing a lot of work and changing patterns? Like, how did you get there?
Oh my gosh. We could have a whole episode about that. But I didn't even see until I wrote my book that my first 5 or 6 serious relationships were all a repetition of my relationship with my mom. So in every single relationship, romantic relationship, I chose somebody who had something about themselves that made them not be able to choose me. And I kept trying to get them to prioritize and choose me because my mom never did. And they never did, they never did, they never did, they never did, they never did. It was painful, it was painful, it was painful. I just kept learning that I wasn't worth being chosen, which was not helpful. And then I happened upon a person who turned out to be my first husband. I'm now married to my second husband, who was lovely and wonderful. But one thing that I didn't really know about children of narcissistic parents is we often choose people. Sorry, when we happen to choose someone who's healthy and who gives us unconditional love, it can actually feel kind of boring. We're used to kind of having to work for it. We're used to having to tap dance and people please and, you know, be exciting and flashy for people to prioritize us. And when that doesn't happen, it can feel kind of boring. And so we might end the relationship when maybe we shouldn't, or cheat on our partner or whatever else to kind of get that stimulation. I think maybe that's part of what happened in my first healthy relationship. But eventually I did some more of the work and found my husband, and it feels really good to be seen and unconditionally loved. I can absolutely say that for sure. It's such a good relationship and I'm absolutely thriving in it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think that that whole boring thing is so common. And it's when you meet somebody who's securely attached, when you are anxiously attached or an avoidant, it feels like, no, thank you. You know, or I don't deserve this or whatever. And it doesn't feel like a good match. Yeah, it's just fascinating. And I think the more we know ourselves and the more we can heal, you can, you know, you're living proof that you can change the legacy, you can have healthy relationships, you can break patterns if you do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story and sharing more about your book and everything that you've learned around narcissistic parents and how they impact us, and especially narcissistic mothers. Tell our audience how they can find you.
You can go to my website, which is my name, SuzanneManserPhD.com.
Okay. And then you're on Instagram, Facebook. We'll have all those links in the show notes.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for sharing this important topic with my audience today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This was really fun.
You're welcome. And thanks everybody for listening. If you love our show, please, please rate us, review us, give us a high rating and review. It helps us to be seen by more people, and share the podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We're everywhere. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.